If you've ever thought that German sounded very angry, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Guys, like and comment. The comment section is out of control. I will do nothing to control you guys, but get in there and find out why YouTube is always close to banning me. Thank you very much. Guys, the biggest support of the channel right now is Big Daddy Unlimited. Big Daddy Unlimited is like the Costco of the gun world. 99 cents for the first month. After that, price goes up. Is it worth it? Well, it really depends on if you're buying products or not. If you're not going to be buying anything, then yeah, you probably shouldn't sign up. But I think it is worth it. If you are going to, you can typically get very good prices. Guys, we have a couple other sponsors of this particular video. We have the Dude Bag, SDI, Sonoran Desert Institute to learn some guns, and of course, Onward Research, my company. We'll be pushing it more, but we've come out with a couple good collaborations, specifically with LAS Concealment. Some cool holsters. I'm obsessed with splinter tarn, so here we are with my very own holster made. All my autistic whims can now be fulfilled through Onward Research, so go check them out. Ladies and gentlemen, might have been forgotten, but most certainly not by me. Lugers in 30 cal. So before we get into the video, what is my relationship with the Luger? Nothing. I did buy this handgun of my own accord, with my own cold, hard-earned cash. Luger's been a handgun I've always wanted to get my hands on just because I think that they just look great, in my opinion. But in any case, let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about this very famous handgun. The Luger is a semi-automatic, magazine-fed, toggle-locked, short recoil-operated handgun. And it is very interesting. So it was designed in 1898. Now, to be clear, I am not Forgotten Weapons. If you want history, I am not your man. But suffice to say, it was designed in 1898. And what's interesting to me about these early handguns is, there was no direction. There wasn't like a precedent that had been set in modern handguns at this time. We were coming out of the revolver and black powder world, and suddenly these smokeless powders were invented that allowed for different types of operation to be used and different types of mechanisms to be perfected. And he came up with a lot of very interesting designs, and one of those was this toggle lock action used in the Luger. Just very interesting. We'll talk more about that later. But my whole point being is that they had no direction. It was like pretty much these people were told to build a weapon, and they came up with a lot of very interesting designs, including the Luger right here. So the question in my mind is always, how do these designs hold up nowadays? Because designs like the 1911 have obviously proven themselves to be just absolutely masterful designs in the case that they served with many militaries for a very, very long time. And even still today, the 1911 is still a revered weapon. So it shows you that time doesn't really really chip away at the legendary status, or if a weapon is effective, it's simply effective. It's not obsolete, but it may be obsolescent, like in the case of the Luger. So what's really cool to me about the Luger is when it was designed, pretty much what happened was it was made and nothing really changed after that. The weapon remained, for the most part, mostly the same. Despite all the military contracts, some things were changed, such as grips and the specific type of texturing on like the safety and that type of thing. But by and far, this weapon kind of stayed the same. And that's a pretty big testament to how well it was designed. So there must be something said about that, about how he pretty much got it right out of the gate. And that is something that is very cool. Now, talking about this specific one, if you're a Luger fan, you'll know that there are a couple very telling things about this particular Luger. So my particular Luger was manufactured in 1917. Great year, great movie also. And it really surprised me that when I saw that stamp there, I was like, dang, 1917, and it looks pretty good. And there's more to this. So this is a DWM Luger that was made in 1917. Now, as you can see, it doesn't have the characteristic, brown grips of the Lugers of that time. And that's because this particular Luger was sometime after World War II, or during World War II, was captured by the Russians, or perhaps maybe the East Germans at this point, and was re-arsenaled. It was reworked, it was rebarreled. You can see at the bottom, not sure if you can see it, but there's a nice little N with a crest right over it. That is a very telltale sign of a rework, as well as the grips. You can tell by these, the bullseye grips of the Vopo. So these were typically pressed into service with the police of East Germany, but multiple other people did use them. The weapon has also been re-blued. You can tell because typically on a lot of your Lugers, you have some in the white markings, and this one is, for the most part, all blue. Now, that being said, they did do a very good job. There was a lot of pride and workmanship in the reworking of this weapon. Now, another thing that must be brought up is, and this goes for many old firearms, is how much craftsmanship and how much care went into the making of every single weapon. On lathes and with hand fitting, these weapons were made lovingly by Germans. And what's important to note is that you couldn't exactly slap together any two Lugers and make a working weapon. So they were very much so, each and every one of them, a little bit unique. And that is something that's very interesting to me as far as the history of a war weapon does go. And another thing to note is that at the time that these were made with some of the nicest materials and the best steel that Germany could possibly muster. These were exceptionally well made, and if you look at it, the lack of machining marks, the amount of polish that went into it, there's a lot of craftsmanship that went into these weapons. And a question I often ask myself about weapons nowadays is, I remember I bought a Glock Gen 1 that was made in like the 80s, and the frame was cracking and it was slowly crumbling because the polymer that was used was becoming brittle. And at that time I wondered to myself, in 100 years, this weapon is 104 years old. In 104 years, is this Glock going to still be a viable weapon? Or will it begin to fall apart to a point where, in the future, people won't really have Glocks because they will have deteriorated to a point where they're no longer shootable. You compare that to this Luger, which despite being 105 years old, of course, it was reworked, but it is a perfectly functioning, perfectly accurate weapon. These are big questions to ask myself. In any case, let's kind of go a little bit further down here. So the first thing we need to talk about is the barrel. Now, it should be noted the barrel is, of course, not the original barrel on this particular Luger. Now, that being said, this Luger barrel is exceptionally well made and exceptionally accurate, and that comes down to a couple things. One, it comes down to the fixed barrel. It also comes down to the materials used. And frankly, with the action, the toggle action, and the fixed barrel, these pistols are just very accurate. It's been noted by multiple authors, by multiple shooters, on just how good these are. I find it quite easy to make 80 to 100 yard shots, as you'll see in this particular video. It's very easy to do follow-ups on. Now, there are a couple caveats to that, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the barrels are quite exceptional. Now, you can see right here on the barrel, we have a fixed front sight as well. What's interesting and should be noted is that there are very fine serrations at the back, a little bit of texture to ensure that when the sun hit it, that you have you don't get a lot of glare off there that could possibly make it harder to aim. They did a very good job of that. Again, there was a lot of care that was taken in the manufacture of these particular firearms. I don't believe that a firearm of this caliber with this amount of machining could be made nowadays and could be made at a price point that would be acceptable to literally anybody. Just incredible. Now, going back from the barrel and the sight, we of course get to our action. Probably one of the most interesting parts about the Luger. Many pistols nowadays, they operate via slide. The weapon fires, the slide cycles, it ejects around, and it feeds around out of that magazine. Now, again, at that time, there was nobody really to tell these guys how to make a firearm. So when this was designed, it was designed so that the bolt, what happens is you have an upper right here. So this weapon is unloaded for you safety Nazis out there. No pun intended. So if we push back on this, you can see that the entirety of that upper pushes back. So when that weapon fires, as that bullet travels down that barrel, this allows the time for that bullet to leave before the action begins to cycle. This is important, of course. You don't want, you want to make sure that enough of those gases travel forward to propel that round. You don't want it early unlocking. That's bad. So this pushes back, and then it hits, as you can notice, this nice little groove right there. And you can see it's about the size of these cams right here. So as it hits those, once it pushes back, it's going to then push that up. So that's then going to cycle this entire thing right there. Just a very, very interesting design. And very odd, quite frankly, very odd. There was actually a rifle that was made with this mechanism as well. And seeing videos of this weapon being fired, I thought to myself, surely this weapon must recoil just horrifically with the amount of mass and the weird way it toggles and goes up. But the thing that surprised me most about the Luger is how controllable it is. And one thing that really hasn't been talked about is how high you can get your hands on this thing to grip it. Because the tank comes up fairly high. It's about where it ends right there. And then what's really cool is you have this little block right here. So actually, when you get your thumbs up on it in a modern shooting stance, you're actually able to ride your thumbs almost at the level of the barrel. And it makes for a very pleasant shooting experience. Of all the old weapons I fired, I think the Luger has surprised me the most in the smoothness of the action and just how easily it fires. Just a very exceptional weapon in my opinion. Now, a couple notes should be made about the action. Nowadays, a lot of companies are putting out subpar ammunition. I'm sure they did back when as well. But the problem is that this weapon was made for hot military ammunition, hot loads. So make sure that if you're going to be shooting this, you give it that ammunition that it needs. Make sure that you research that a little bit. If you're feeding it anemic Russian crap, more than likely, it's not going to cycle well for you. I've heard the adage quite a bit that if it doesn't eat steel, then it doesn't deserve brass. That's absolutely freaking insane and makes zero sense. Feed this girl well, and she's going to perform well. Another thing that people have noted about the Luger right here is that your rear sight is right here. If you notice, it's actually on that toggle. So when you fire, that entire rear sight does move. And in addition to that, if you're aiming at something, say you guys, for example, and I fire this thing, this entire thing is going to cycle up, and there's going to be a moment where I simply can't see you due to the height of the toggle action right there. So the question is in practice and principle, how much does that affect anything? Well, certainly it's there. Certainly I do lose a sight picture when I'm shooting like that. That being said, I find that overall it's really not that big of a deal because the weapon just feels so good when firing and has such a soft recoil impulse that it's something that I didn't really notice that much. But it should be noted that it is, of course, an issue. So that does count against the weapon somewhat. That being said, it's just so elegant and beautiful. I want to put it against it. It's just a very cool action. In addition to that, the action is very reliable. The fact of the matter is that this weapon served through, at the very least, 2 world wars, in addition to whatever wars that this weapon was taken through by police and mercenaries or what have you. The point is, it's a reliable, it's an accurate, and it's a very well-made and well-thought-out mechanism. In many ways, I'm kind of sad that it didn't catch on more. I understand why it didn't, but at the same time, just a teeny bit sad that it didn't because it is exceptional. Now, with that being said, we need to get down to the rear sight. This is an issue with all old weapons. Sights were not that good. Now, I will say, front sight on the Luger, quite good. Rear sight on the Luger, not good at all. Yeah, it is very just a very shallow V-notch. And it's very similar to the C96 in many ways, which was developed in a very similar time period. So, in the 1911 as well, the early 1911s, of course, had terrible sights as well. And I have to say that of those weapons, I do find these to be certainly more acceptable and more shootable than the C96, which to date has some of the worst sights that I've ever worked with. So I have to give it to Luger that at the time, I find that this would have been a very effective pistol. Of course, you should be firing this thing one-handed. That's just the way it worked. Safety. Safety is very interesting. So on the side right here, again, nobody was there to tell them how these, how to put a safety on or how to do controls. But the safety is certainly one of the not a very well thought out design in my opinion. So we have it on fire right here, and then to put onto safety, we can push it down. It says it in German, can't read German, sounds angry. That about just for German that I know. And then of course we have that little bar right there. So one way to see if it's engaged, you can see that little bar that's protruding up. In any case, when you're going to shoot, essentially what I tend to do is I try to sweep it with my thumb. It kind of semi-works. It's not great. A couple other things I've done is I've swept up with my support hand as I've drawn my weapon out. I'm going to get a Kydex holster for this thing or start concealed carrying it because it is kind of incredible. Now, safety is okay. Another important thing is that the extractor on the top actually worked as a loaded chamber indicator. So when I loaded around and I dropped that toggle action, it's nighttime, I'm not sure I'm about to go on a raid, I feel my finger right over the top of that. And if there's a round loaded, then the extractor is going to protrude, have my loaded chamber indicator. Take that, Walther. Just kidding. So going in from there, another important thing, of course, we have our lanyard loop right there. We have a shoulder sock, a little implement right there, so you can put in your shoulder sock, make this into a little carbine. It does kind of kick ass as a carbine. And then we get into the grip angle. The longer I've shot, the more I've seen the nuance and how certain grip angles can really work for certain people. So the 55-degree grip angle on the Luger has been often imitated by many modern firearms. Of course, Luger with their line of pistols and Glocks and many others. And I always found them to be a little bit unnatural. The more I've shot, the more I've begun to appreciate the steeper grip angle, especially in terms of recoil control. So I do find, and it's been noted by many people, that the Luger points very well. I found that guns like the Luger, the 1911, the Browning High Power tend to just point for me. I'm not sure if it's because I like older weapons or if I'm John Browning incarnated, probably not. But I just love the way these older weapons point. It's just a very pointable gun, and it feels natural to shoot, and I've just always loved it. So I can say a lot about the grip. It's incredibly comfortable. The palm swells are particularly where they need to be, and it feels good. And I imagine with a better grip, instead of these plastic ones from these plastic Bopo grips, that'd probably be even better. The magazine release is fine, right? Some people who have teeny tiny little man hands can't grab it. For me, with medium-sized man hands, I have no problems. If you have giant mitts, probably no problems for you as well. So magazine release is fine. Magazines. There are a lot of different magazines. Unfortunately, I don't have the original for this particular weapon. And even if it did come with this weapon, it probably wouldn't be the original because this thing's been around everywhere. I've always wondered about firearms and about their stories because this weapon was manufactured 1917, about the end of World War I. Certainly likely served through World War II and then was captured, likely by the Russians, and then was re-arsenaled and put in service in East Germany with the police force. If a gun could tell a story, I would love to hear this one's right here because that sounds absolutely fascinating to me. In any case, magazines hold 8 rounds. These are reproduction Metcar mags, and they are incredible. They have worked super, super well for me. Metcar is an incredible company. They don't pay me or anything. I just really like their stuff. So good on them. The insertion of a magazine is actually pretty easy, and also you have nice little circles right here. So if this thing gets jammed up with mud, you have a little bit of purchase to really rip that thing out. So that is your magazine. Finally, trigger. We got to talk about the trigger. Curiously enough, I've seen a lot of people say that the trigger on the Luger is terrible, that it's gritty, long, and nothing to write home about. And I utterly and completely in every way disagree with that sentiment. I think that the Luger trigger is absolutely incredible. In my mind, it rivals the 1911 in many ways with a very short, very crisp trigger pull. So, for the first time ever on Garand, let's go set trigger together. All right, feeling through. We are on fire, of course. Feeling that, so I have a little bit of play right there, maybe a millimeter. Get into that wall, pushing through to about a 2nd millimeter, 3rd. Beautiful. Okay, feeling that reset. Right there, there's that click right there, about 2 millimeters forward, back into that trigger pull, another 2 millimeters, and that very crisp let off. Maybe 6 pounds. It is a military trigger, but man, is that smooth, is that short, is that crisp. In those old movies about World War II, I think of like Band of Brothers, it's often shown American soldiers accidentally discharging the weapon. And I can certainly understand that given how light and how short the trigger pull is on these particular weapons, especially if you didn't know how the safety worked. That kind of portion of history, I always wondered how somebody could manage to shoot themselves with this handgun, but I can understand if they didn't understand how the safety worked. Just a cool little piece of history right there, but what an incredible trigger. Now, a cool thing with the Luger is that on your last shot, so you're firing, bang, 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 last shot, the weapon will lock back. So you'd be like, you can clearly see that your weapon is empty. It's not like sometimes on the slide where you're like, am I empty? This is blocking your sight picture. You're like, I am empty. So all you have to do is drop that old mag, new mag in. And of course, this one is a loaded mag. So, this one is an empty mag, so it's not going to drop. So you put the new mag in, and then all you have to do is release the toggle lock. So what I typically do is old mag out, new mag in, and then I simply reach my support hand up, sweep it off, and it goes right into the battery right there. It's a fairly elegant reload. I wish there was, of course, a slide release of some type, but that being said, just being able to load and sweep up and over is very easy. And if for whatever reason it doesn't fully seat, just tap the top, and then you're back into the fight. It's an elegant design. To be honest, many of these old weapons, I understand why they're completely obsolescent or obsolete or are no longer used. But with the Luger, I see a lot of merits to the design. The grip angle helps reduce that recoil. With the toggle action, helps kind of defeat it a little bit more. And you just have a very just soft shooting, very accurate weapon. I love the Luger. It's a really cool firearm. Can't say enough good things about the Luger. Just an incredible design. Get out there, pick one up. But here's the thing. As cool as these are, if you don't train, you're still gonna suck with them. So make sure that you train, guys. Training is what matters. Mindset training, tons of great companies. Haley Strategic, possibly my dad, we don't know. Bear Solutions, Cogworks, Tony Cowden. Tons of great guys out there, all willing to give you knowledge on how to operate these weapons. Make sure you make your mind the weapon, and everything else will follow from there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you guys very much. I've got nothing else for you. Final thing for you guys. Books. Reading is important. Reading is very important. Internet reading, not so important. A lot of people don't have a lot of good things to say. Typically, with a lot of these older classics, you have very interesting thoughts and very interesting history pieces. Please read interesting and thoughtful material. It will, in many ways, affect your life positively. So make sure that you go out there and you read. Become a well-rounded, well-educated individual. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys very much. And you know, if you've gotten this far, a final shout out to Survival Dispatch. Survival Dispatch is a repository of survival information. Former survival guy right here, and I can't recommend it enough. Final shout out to my Patreon people. Love you guys. Final thing. More so now than ever, many entities are coming after your rights in a variety of different means and methods. Please ensure that you are being more vocal and more active politically to ensure that we don't lose these very important rights that are gun rights. Make sure that you fight right now. Make sure that you are active politically. Get in there, and as always, if you are talking with somebody about gun rights, please be polite. Please be a good ambassador of our community. Let's bring more people in. Let's be more helpful. Let's be more nice. Let's be more knowledgeable. And let's bring in people who are interested in firearms and encourage everyone to join us, because it is a natural, human, God-given right to defend oneself. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Got nothing else for you.